Good evening. Someone's here. A few people turning up. I managed to put the wrong... Good evening. Hi, Lynn. Hi, Rebecca. Hi again, Natalie. Sally and Peter and Jim. Good to see you. Hi, Birgit. Hope you got my email. Hi, Liz. Yes, I'm glad you found me because I slightly mucked up the time for this live stream. It should have started an hour ago. Not a good thing. Barbara, good evening. Hope you're well. Hi again, Dave. Good evening, Alex. Back in this country, Alex, I think, are you? Olivia, good evening. Glenda and Julia. I haven't got anything particularly special planned. Good evening, Julia. Glad you could make it. I thought we could do like a Q&A on insight meditation. Well, not really meditation. Insight wisdom, which can be practiced as a meditation, but really transcends meditation. Good evening, Bodil. But any aspect, really, we can discuss if you've got any questions. And, you know, I know you're all concerned about my well-being after last night's football match. It's only football. It doesn't matter. We've got more important things to worry about. Oh, fine. It's England. What do you expect? So I've just realised there's probably lots of rattling around going on. So we can discuss... Pam, hi. Really glad you could make it all the way from Canada. It's great. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it, that we can do this? Alex, I'm back as far as London. Next stage is getting to the southwest. COVID joys. Good evening, Liz. Glad you could make it. Yes. Good. Good. One thing I have been thinking about with meditation is how important it is. Annika, hi. Really glad you could join us. I hear things have been a bit tricky up there in your part of the country. Annika, I hope you're okay. Roland, life is suffering and then there's penalties. Oh, why do we get for the most junior players to take 3 penalties? Anyway, we're not here to discuss football. Sue, good evening. Hi, John. Yes, one thing I've been thinking about meditation, and this is something that you can employ. I think it will be beneficial if you can employ it anyway. It's a little trick that I've learned, which is to practice with joy. The first most important thing is to bring the mind into alignment with our natural state. So our natural state is free of passionately craving for life to be different. So any kind of resistances where we're going, well, that's not right, and that's not right, and shouldn't be like this, and you shouldn't be like that. We're out of true alignment, or out of alignment with who we truly are and what life actually is. And there's a trick you can play, and I've played it today. I had to go to another town, to a post office in another town where they have digital facilities so that I could apply for a new driving license and a new passport. And so I had to drive over to this town called Melksham, which is about a 15-minute drive away, for those that don't know. And I spent the entire journey going through everything that I liked about the journey. Anything and everything could be internal, external, big, small. If I saw a nice tree, I would comment to myself, and as I was by myself, I could talk out loud, and I'd say, "That's a really beautiful tree. That's oh, that's an interesting car." And oh, this is an interesting little town I'm passing through, and I got to where I needed to go and parked up and went on my way. I had to walk through the town, just commenting to myself quietly now about how nice people were, what a nice little town it was, and got to the post office and remarked to myself how nice it was to be able to have these facilities available and how enjoyable it was and how quiet it was in here and how pleasant the post office staff were. And then I finally got to the counter and just had a really nice conversation with the lady who helped me very much to get my passport application and my driving license applications done. And we had a very nice conversation. And then I came home, and all the way home, I was practicing the same things. And the effect of doing that is that you start to feel happy. You're not obsessing about what's wrong. You're not resistant. You're generating a quality of the mind by the way that you think. And we need to remember that life, the Buddha said, is the creation of the mind. And so therefore, hi Peter, glad you could make it. The way we think about the world as it's unfolding will be reflected in our moods. So the way we think is producing perceptions, resultant perceptions and feelings. And so this is something that we can bring into the meditation, because I'll tell you what, it ain't half a lot easier to practice meditation when you're feeling contentment, satisfaction, fulfillment, joy, peace. Seeing things arise and pass away is a lot easier when you feel like that than when you feel angry, irritable, stressed, and so forth. And we have to understand that the mind is so malleable. Hello, Ellen. So I've got all three of our Canadian meditators here. Great. So I hope this is making sense. So when we do something like, when we sit down to practice and we take account of our minds as we find it, and spending some time practicing gratitude, perhaps. Now, there's an important aspect to this, which is finding something that comes easy to you. Something that it's easy to be aligned with. So with some people, practicing loving kindness comes really easily. With other people, it seems like their attitude towards it is that they're being compelled to do it. If you feel like you're being compelled to do it, it's not going to work. It has to be something which is natural to you and feels right and effortless. It's something so it's reflecting on life in a way that feels natural and normal for you. So it doesn't feel like you're being coerced in any way. It's something that you very much enjoy. So for me, one of the recollections that I would do would be on the Dhamma, more so than the Buddha or the Sangha. That's more sort of people orientated, isn't it? I always found reflecting on the Dhamma itself would fill me with joy, and therefore, by thinking in that way, I was changing the resultant perception of life, and so you come into alignment with reality because you're not at odds with it. And then you're sitting down and you're not at odds with reality. It makes watching the breath so much easier and so much more enjoyable. It makes noting things arise and pass away so much easier and so much more enjoyable. Is this making any sense? Please somebody comment and tell me it's making sense. You've all gone quiet. Yeah? I think even though I talk a lot about how you don't have to be ultra concentrated in order to do the work of Vipassana meditation for insight wisdom. You can be standing in the queue at the checkout at the supermarket and you can practice Vipassana. But it doesn't have to be fraught. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be agony. There doesn't have to be coercion. But spending the time there at the checkout at the supermarket, just looking at people and going, "Oh, that's a nice hat." Oh, look at the cover of that magazine. That's colourful. What are you doing? You're aligning yourself with reality because that is your unfolding reality. So because you're not at odds with it, because you're not fighting it, everything is so much more simple. And you just, approaching the checkout, and you notice the young chap or the young lady at the checkout, and they've been here working all day. I used to work in a supermarket when I was 16. I don't know what it's like. Good for you, mate. Good for you, girl. And you are deliberately attuning yourself to the unfolding reality by agreeing that it's fine as it is. It doesn't have to be any other way. And if you do that, and if you do that for a little while, you will relax. It's not like, and when I say joy, I'm not talking about the joy that the Italians felt last night. I'm not talking about that level of joy. I'm not talking about wrapping yourself in a flag kind of joy. I'm just talking about a quiet joy, a quiet bubbling stream of joy type of joy. So it's the absence of resistance that's really the important thing. And if you establish that, because you're now aligned with reality and you're not fighting reality, it's so much easier to see things arise and pass away. Yeah. Now, if it is the case that you have done the work of establishing that unfolding reality is fine as it is and doesn't need your egotistical resistance of it, and you can just you are therefore in alignment with it, then watch the breath for a little while, and you'll find that, and you just go, and the other thing is it's got to be free of any sense of a goal. It's having faith that if I just observe the breath, or if the breath is too subtle for you, just perceiving the body resting in the chair, and maybe moving attention around the body, maybe relaxing parts of the body, you'll find it so much easier because you've already put yourself in alignment with reality. Now, if something comes up which obstructs that, which takes you out of alignment, that's resistance, that's craving, that's the arising of worry, that's the arising of doubt. But if you're in alignment and those sort of thoughts emerge, it's so much easier to include them and therefore not be swayed by them because you are already in an inclusive and aligned state of mind. Then you start looking at transience. Yeah. Liz, she'll be standing in the queue, angsting over whether you've joined the right queue or not. Yeah, you literally don't care. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to realize that I think there are all kinds of like secret benefits to aligning in life in that way. I think that if you were aligned throughout the journey in the supermarket, not only will you not care what queue you end up in, you'll most likely end up in the right queue for you, the quickest queue. It seems like life rewards someone when they're in alignment more so than if they're not. Because if you're not in alignment, you're more likely to end up in the other queue. Natalie, recently I've been appreciating that some otherwise considered tricky habitual tendencies are really okay, that they're fascinating rather than horrible. It makes it easier to note them and not hate them. Perfect. It's coming into alignment with the content of your own thinking. there's nothing you can do about the arising of a tricky habitual tendency. What makes it tricky is our refusal to align with it, meaning to accept that that is unfolding reality, because we hive off thinking. We say, well, thinking isn't part of the rest of the universe. Thinking is me, which is separate from the rest of the universe. Therefore, it can't be treated in the same way. But when I was meditating earlier, there was a bird, blackbird, chirping in the garden. I think he's chirping still. And I realised, as I've done many, many times, that the chirping of the bird was no less important than my thinking, and my thinking was no more important than the chirping of the bird. And if you can relegate thinking to that degree of importance, I'm not saying that some thoughts aren't important, but generally speaking, when you're meditating especially, thoughts are not important. And that's important because that means that there is no requirement for the absence of thoughts. And that's really important because people consider the arising of thoughts to be a problem in meditation. But if they're no more important than the chirping of a bird, when a bird chirps away when you're meditating, you don't go, oh, I can't meditate because the bird's chirping. I'm going to have to go and do something else and wait till the bird stops singing. No, you just carry on. And if you've got your right purpose, your right intention with the meditation, you know, oh, I include the sound of the chirping of the bird as an object that I observe, and you observe that it's transient. Why? Because you're not at war with reality, because you're properly aligned to reality. Peter, if you're to rest content in the moment without changing anything, but you're changing monkey mind, aren't you changing things? Aren't you meant to let hindrances arise, then transform them? Well, there is deliberate thinking. What we're talking about here is deliberate thinking. So doing a recollection is deliberate thinking. Loving kindness meditation is deliberate thinking. Reflecting on reasons to be grateful is deliberate thinking. You're doing that with a specific purpose in mind, the knowledge that if I align with reality, so practicing gratitude is a really wonderful way of bringing joy, quiet joy, a sense of contentment with unfolding reality. See, something like goal orientation is discontent. Wanting the meditation to be happy is discontent, because if you want the meditation to be happy, it's not happy. So instead of thinking in that way, we think, okay, what are 5 reasons to be grateful today? And you go through those 5, it's aligning you with reality, because you're not saying, well, I want life to be different, I want there to be happiness in the meditation. You're just reflecting on the nature of reality, and that brings you into alignment with it, which helps you let go of the resistance, and that helps you then to calm the mind down. And then once the mind is calm, you rest, content with whatever arises, in order to note it. At which point you're noting the arising of worry, you're noting the arising of doubt, or whatever it might be. But you've created this basis of calm through intelligent thinking. Right? At which point, thinking can then be relegated to no more important than the chirping of a bird. Birgit, it is making sense, and I suppose I need to take a closer look where all that resistance is coming from. No, I honestly, genuinely don't believe that you do. Because if we're saying, well, I need to really look closely at where all this resistance is coming from, it's focusing on the resistance. It's becoming ever more aware of the resistance. So I'm wondering whether instead of focusing on the resistance, you could focus the mind on reasons to be grateful, all the good qualities in people and things around you, loving kindness. And as a consequence of generating the joy, quiet joy, sense of, well, life's all right, because you're in alignment with it, the mind calms down. As the mind's calming down, then you can perhaps observe the arising of a resistance that comes up subsequently to it. But I think the weird thing is once you've aligned with reality and you're letting it unfold, those resistances are not as strong. If the resistance is strong, it's because you want life to be different in some way. Hope that makes sense. Julia, today's experience sounds amazing and so helpful. It really makes sense. Going to give it a go. Honestly, I'm so profoundly struck by the difference it made. You think about because we're not separate. It's an illusion to think we're separate. So if you're repeatedly, how to describe it? If somebody's, it's going to sound so new agey what I'm about to say, I apologise, but if you're vibrating at a certain frequency because you're perpetually running hateful thoughts, oh, I don't like his haircut, he looks stupid, or I think she needs to lose a bit of weight, oh my goodness. If you're perpetually looking at reality and describing everything that's wrong about it, you will vibrate at a particular frequency. And if somebody else comes close to that, they'll start vibrating at that frequency. I mean, it's just like, whoa. So if you change the frequency, if you turn the dial to another radio station, and if you start thinking about everything that you like about what's going on around you and within you, you're coming into alignment with reality. You're vibrating at a frequency that people really love. People love it. They'll come closer to you if that's what you want. But you know what I mean. So yeah. So once there's that, you're in alignment with. I mean, because saying it has to be joyful, I don't mean it has to be. I don't mean you have to be in floods of joy. I just mean that there is whenever you're aligned, you know that you're aligned with reality. There is no passionate desire for life to be different at that time. There can be the upwelling of contentment. There can, and so the way we approach meditation, if we're goal orientated, if we have expectations, is that we're setting up this comparison. So we are dissatisfied with what is. Whereas if you have spent the time doing this, then you are satisfied with what is. You are fulfilled by what is. So you're not using meditation to try to make things different. You've settled. You're aligned and you're settled. So it's settled, being settled. You're not trying to get rid of anything. You're not trying to make anything happen. You're letting life breathe. Simply by watching the breath, life is breathing. Then practice Vipassana. Then turn your attention to noting whatever comes up. And noting objects. And I think you'll find that makes a tremendous difference. So then we can start to talk about, well, what do we mean by insight? Insight wisdom. Olivia, can lead to mental illness. Yeah, well, how could what people call mental illness be something different other than habitual tendencies, hindrances, run to an extreme? What else could it be, really? So by the same token, if you're just observing and noting what you like about reality as it's unfolding, that's mental well-being, isn't it? Peter, do you oscillate between stages of insight over hours and days? The other day, everything was arising and passing so quickly and smoothly. Brilliant. That's what we like to hear, Peter. So quick and smoothly, almost as if the mind didn't project many perception distortions on the senses, but the next day it seemed like it was hard to dig out of the thought-feeling loop. Peter, that's great. It because we don't emphasize deep states of concentration first. If somebody practices samatha meditation, calming meditation, to a really high degree, and they become really skilled at it, each time they go to meditate, they will sort of be able to just put this really deep blanket of calm over what's going on, and they won't experience, perhaps will experience a more consistent meditation practice. However, really the task of Vipassana is not to be deeply concentrated. It is to go through the thought-feeling loop. I mean, essentially that is what we call condition-dependent origination. There is resultant experience, which is painful, and then there is a response to what's unfolding, saying, it should be different. Whatever that is conditioning that painful feeling in the moment. Could be a thought about the past, it could be something that's actually happening in our experience now, or it could be something projected about what's going to happen in the future. But nonetheless, it's painful, and then we get into locking our horns with it and go, it should be different, it should be different like this, it should be different like that. We want to see all of this. So although it means, because you're not developing that degree of concentration, it means you'll have your off days. You'll have days when it's very, very difficult to locate the mind in the present. There's a tangle, there's a fetter, something is fettering the mind at that time, and the mind wants to keep going back to it and keep playing with it again and again. Is it there now? Because if you can recognize that even in hindsight, yesterday was a tough day trying to get the mind to focus, trying to get the mind to behave. However, the day before that, it was great. I could see things arising and passing away, which, by the way, is absolutely brilliant. And what's the difference? And so rather than just rejecting yesterday's experience and saying, I want it to be more like the day before yesterday, it's saying, oh no, okay, let's take a step back. What's the difference? What's the difference? Like, I always know, for instance, that if I have a bad meditation, it's because I haven't been diligent in setting up mindfulness. I haven't been diligent in just noting and acknowledging what's actually taking place in my, even in the most sort of like big blocky chunks. So just like what there is walking. So if I'm walking to the shrine room here at the centre, I will note walking. It's a very big blocky kind of thing to note, but it means that I'm in the practice of actually noting before I go to sit to meditate. That's really, really important, that you've started the process of noting before you actually sit. So when you close the door, you note closing the door. When you go and then you sit, you note sitting. So walking has stopped and sitting has begun. Even if it's in very blocky ways, it's actually really, really helpful. So I'm slightly off put because I'm getting a message from Facebook about the frame rate. It needs saving. Low latency. Well, I want to do this. It's not letting me. Anyway, I'm waffling. I apologise. I'm just going to ignore it for the time being. Hope the warning message goes away. So yeah, so setting up for meditation is hugely beneficial. Spending the time setting things up, spending the time settling the mind down based on a mindful acknowledgement of the state of mind that you start with, not rejecting it, not saying if you're irritable when you sit down to meditate, you've noted it, then stay with the irritation. If you think that, oh, I'm supposed to be meditating and I'm irritable and that's wrong, you've already fallen into this misalignment. Reality is that you are irritated, or there is irritation. Take the self out of the description. There is irritation, and you start with that. And if you're not fighting the irritation, you've reduced it to perhaps just a sense of mental discomfort. At which point, it might be possible to then go, all right, well, what do I like about what's unfolding? Well, I have managed to sit down to meditate, so I like that. I like that a lot. That's really nice. I really like the fact that I've sat down to meditate. That's really good. I like that. Okay. Well, it's quite quiet. No one's bothering me. I really like that. I like the fact that no one's bothering me. I've got this time to myself. This is brilliant. This is great. And you're sitting there a bit longer, and you notice the discomfort. Maybe there's physical discomfort. Um, oh, you got another message for me. I'm irritable because I got man flu. Noting small violins all day. Oh, poor Peter. So yeah, perfect. Absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect for meditation. As long as you don't have fixed ideas about what meditation is allowed to be. If you've got a fixed meditation about meditation which says, I can't practice because I'm irritable because I got the flu is making the practice difficult. No, it's not making it difficult. It means it's just the things that you're noting are different than you had hoped for. So note the things, deconstruct man flu, Peter, into its component parts. What are the feelings? What are the mental formations? What are the physical manifestations? Heat, cold, movement, pressure changes, those sorts of things. Because what you're doing is, again, you're coming into alignment with reality rather than, because the small violins is saying, poor Peter, he wanted to meditate and he can't because of this. And that's taking you out of alignment, whereas coming into alignment is to say, okay, so this is what flu's like. Okay, let's observe this. Let's take an interest in it. The other Peter, what is the difference between being generally aware of arising and passing away, which I am, and profoundly experiencing transience in terms of being an insight? We can consider and think about the reality of impermanence in so many different ways. We can think about the fact that the sun is going to go supernova, the fact that no empire has ever lasted, all the way down to your favourite TV programme ending, or all the way down to having eaten a nice meal and that's now gone, or even down to each mouthful of food and noticing the transient nature of all the components that go to eating a meal, right down to just noting and observing momentary events. And so by doing that, at whatever level, you are fulfilling your part of the bargain, which is the willingness to work at knocking out the misperception that things are permanent by observing again and again the fact that things are indeed impermanent. that's what's going to make the difference in your life. So there is this process of noting. You note the object. You're not trying to note transience, you're trying to note the object. As a consequence of noting the object, its transient, fundamental transient characteristic becomes obvious. You can't deny there's a bird singing, and each little component part of the little bird's trilling is noted. And you see that the actual there's a bird's song, which is a kind of concept that's being superimposed on the experience, but the actual experience is very just momentary arisings and passings away. And every now and then there is just an awareness that arises, which is just more complete. It's like something just got knocked out, and it's got knocked out completely on that occasion, and there's a kind of just like, oh, it really is transient. So you're doing all the little knockings away from your side, and then there's just this clarity. I think clarity is the right word, really. There's a clarity of seeing into, in a very sort of, in that moment, in a very comprehensive way. So I think that's the difference. You do your little tapping away from your side, and it's like there's this sort of shattering, and there's this just like this really clear recognition of that particular characteristic in that moment. Yeah. I remember one particularly strong insight into non-self arising when I think I was on retreat. It's the afternoon, and somebody in one of the gardens nearby was using a lawnmower, and all the component parts of that experience were noted. The sound was noted. The perception lawnmower was noted. I think it was a pleasant feeling. Quite like the sound of lawns being mown. It wasn't an unpleasant experience by any means. And there was in that moment the clear recognition. So it wasn't really noted as such, but what came back was just this really clear, this clarity as to the fact that all those component parts all arose. I think ear base was a very strong component in that one as well that I noted. And there was ear consciousness, hearing arose in that moment. And there was a different level of knowing, which was knowing without any shadow of a doubt that all those components arose spontaneously due to conditions, and that the experience of mowing the lawn contained no self nature. I mean, it was unfolding as those sorts of experiences always unfold. It was just seeing that, there's something that had been presumed wasn't in it. And what had been presumed was that there was someone who was doing the hearing, and that was completely absent in that moment. And it was known and seen that it was absent in that. And it wasn't like I hadn't noted non-self before. I had. But there was a clarity to this, a completeness to it, which was a thorough seeing of the true nature of the thing, which was different than the conscious noting of things. A different order of knowing, I think you'd have to say. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the question. Has anybody else got some questions? I can't believe you practice insight meditation and wouldn't have questions about the practice. And while you come up with a question, I'm going to try and sort out this frame rate business. Dismiss. Frame rate. Jan, reality today was spending 4 hours listening to an 8-year-old boy telling me about Pokemon. 4 hours? Well, that's very impressive. I tried to find some contentment, but seemed to keep losing the will to live. Then noted the joy on his face and had to smile. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's because we're all confronted with, sort of like people and situations that we find quite taxing and quite trying. And I wonder whether this process of identifying what you do like about what's actually going on, because we have this tendency to dwell on the fact that this 8-year-old kid's telling me about Pokemon, and no, with all the greatest will in the world, I'm not interested. But what do we like about that interaction? And it's picking up the other end of the stick, I guess. Maybe that'll help. Peter, is it good sometimes to switch from one of the three characteristics to another? I relied heavily on impermanence, but I switched to no self after noticing many involuntary perceptions arising after hearing the football fans outside my flat. I saw the conditions that caused it to arise. That's an interesting question about whether you should specifically choose things, objects, and characteristics to attend to. And I think it's a mix and match approach, because there are certain times I find myself encouraging a student to look at something specifically. What comes to mind immediately is the problem of neutral feelings, that often the meditator, although can locate pleasant feelings easily enough, and can locate painful feelings relatively easily, neutral feelings seem to elude them. And my advice there would be to specifically attend to noting sense contacts with a view to recognizing which of three basic types of feeling arise conditioned by that contact. And in doing so, you are able to locate the pleasant ones easily enough, you're able to locate the unpleasant ones easily enough. And if you're struggling to identify whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, the likelihood is that is neutral feeling. And if someone does that, as a consequence, they realise that there are vastly more neutral feelings than either pleasant or unpleasant feelings. We couldn't exist, really, if we were being bombarded with pleasant and unpleasant feelings all the time. And there are loads and loads and loads of neutral feelings which we tend to ignore. Now, the point of me saying all that is that that's a direct instruction, that's a direct, turning of the mind towards something specifically. Well, you can do that if there are specific reasons for doing so, but also you need to know that if you continue to watch impermanence, the other two marks will become apparent. There's no way they cannot become apparent, because they are three facets of the same experience. And it's, generally speaking, it's easier for people to first locate transience, and as a consequence of beginning to note transience, because remember, what we do is we actually note the object. We note the object, and as a consequence of noting the object, one of the characteristics starts to become evident. And once you start to become more familiar with what we mean by conditionality, the existence of one thing is necessary for the arising of the next thing. So a feeling can only arise because there's a prior contact. If there's no prior contact, the feeling doesn't arise. Once you start to recognize conditionality, then the mark of non-self really starts to show itself up very, very clearly. Equally, the mark of suffering, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, also will arise if you're seeing the impermanence of things. If you're seeing also that things are occurring outside of your control, that's very unsatisfactory. If they're impermanent, it means grasping after them is very unsatisfactory. And so you're deepening your awareness of the inherent suffering in the very fabric of existence, which is amazing. Now, you didn't have to necessarily choose to go seeking out those characteristics. You gained insight into them because you were looking at transience. So it's a mix and match, really. But generally speaking, I think what we want overall, what we want to be doing with insight meditation is choiceless awareness, which means you're not picking and choosing what you're looking at. You're waiting, you are receptive, you're open, and you're giving reality the freedom, which is very good of us, isn't it? To give reality the freedom to be what it is. And because you're open, because you're receptive rather than proactive, things can arise which perhaps you, because if you're guiding, over guiding it, if you're doing too much in the way of guidance, you're not allowing for the unexpected. You have to allow for the unexpected. You have to allow for the fact that there are things occurring which you're not acknowledging. The only way you're going to get to acknowledging them, if you're not you're not setting the meditation up to look in a specific area. But having said that, the caveat is there are times when deliberately turning the attention to a specific thing is very, very helpful. Birgit. With a really strong tendency of trying to fit experience around stories, noting seems counterproductive. I remembered how you on occasion said if there is too much effort to stop meditating and just sit. If there is too much effort to stop meditating, just sit. Yeah. That seems to be the closest I can get to choiceless awareness. Is it all right to do that over a longer time? See, because this is why I'm so strong on this idea of standing in a supermarket, noting things, because it takes you completely out of the assumptions and the template of meditation. This idea of meditation. I have long since stopped meditating. I don't meditate. I'm sitting in a chair with my eyes closed, observing the breathing. And I'm not even observing the breathing in order to get calm. I just like it. I just like being in the moment. I like life being aligned, not misaligned. And the moment I start wanting something out of the practice, I'm misaligned. So literally, I take joy in reality as it is, and I simply attend to. So when it comes to Vipassana, you're not meditating. You're just aligning with reality and taking account of what's actually taking place by noting it. Because meditation has so many connotations. Do you see what I mean? If there's too much effort, it's because there's something in experience that isn't, you're out of alignment. You're not accepting. You're non-accepting of unfolding reality. So the instruction to stop meditating is because there is something which is associated with meditation and an expectation, some kind of comparison going on, and therefore the effort is going in to correct something which is perceived to be wrong. But you're just sitting in a chair. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. There's just, I can hear the church bells. I've got a few different pains in my body. I've been sitting in the same posture for quite a while. The lights from the computer are a bit intense, but I'm happy with all this spontaneous chatter coming out of me, staring at this green light at the top of my computer. That's in alignment, means it's just that's what's unfolding, and so there is no over effort. because there is no sense that there's something wrong. I hope that helps, Birgit. Olivia, sometimes it's like the mind is avoiding seeing the three marks. Is that a thing? Yes, that's a thing. Oh, yes, that's a thing. The hindrances are volitional, willful activities. And if it is the case that a meditator if it's the case that the meditator's never seen any of the three marks, none of their reports ever mention transience and stuff, it's because they're not at the point where they're really looking at that stuff. They're learning about how to deal with the hindered mind. They're learning about how to calm the mind down, and that's fine. If it is that in my discussions as a teacher, there's been a lot of talk about non-self, and there's been, oh, I see non-self and it's wonderful, and I see this and I see that, yeah, great. And then there's a conversation subsequent to that, which is like, it's just hindrances everywhere, it's hindrances everywhere. Why is that? It's because the ego wants to reassert the authority of self over what's actually happening. And so, yeah, we self-sabotage. Because if we continue observing transience, if we continue observing unsatisfactoriness and non-self, it's going to undo all our assumptions upon which our worldview is based. So yeah, there are definitely times when meditators are willfully ignoring the three marks. Interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Liz, I have a question. Doubt. You know it's going to end up just being doubt, Liz. I haven't even read your comment yet. Okay. I have a question that arises often in meditation recently. When to let go of the breath a bit and note. I think this has come about because of lots of worry and flurry at the moment, and the focus as a way to restrain that. Yeah, very good question. Very good question. And I would encourage you to experiment. Really, once you've established you're in alignment, you're watching the breath, you're not fighting them, you're not trying to make reality different at that moment, you're accepting it. Experiment with just coming off the breath completely. And what's the fear? The fear is, well, hindrances like worry will arise and I will lose my focus completely. However, if you are in alignment with reality, you're not fighting reality, and there is mindfulness, just experiment with going over to noting completely. Because if you are noting, you will note very, very early the arising of, say, worry. And if you're noting it as worry, you're not in the content of that thinking. So the content of that thinking is seen to be unreal. Whatever it is, that's not unfolding reality. Unfolding reality is this. Always. Just this. So I would encourage you to experiment with just, coming off the breath. That's a faith thing, isn't it? Because the worst thing that could possibly happen would be that you lose your mindfulness. Well, it wouldn't be the first time. We've all lost our mindfulness on more occasions than we can ever recall, and it doesn't matter because that's part of the process. That's that contrast thing. It's like the loss of mindfulness and how that changes experience then causes us to, it reinforces the sense that, oh yeah, being mindful is a really good idea. So it redoubles our purpose and intent to be mindful. So you won't lose anything from the trialing this of being having the faith to let go of the feeling that the breath is like the stabilizers on your bike. Which is interesting because I talk about doing guided meditations as being like stabilizers on your bike, but it gets to the point we're talking about Vipassana here. If someone is practicing samatha, then you don't want to let go of the awareness of the breath for anything. But if it's Vipassana, the breath, what I discovered was that the breath just simply became one potential object of contemplation. And the mind I realized that as long as I was aligned, as long as I was in the moment, I didn't really have to place my attention anywhere. I could just sit, and the mind would just naturally go to the most obvious object. It just did it spontaneously. It was non-self. It's just doing it by itself, which was in its own right quite remarkable. But the most remarkable thing about the first time that happened to me was like, I realized, oh, now I know what Vipassana is. Now I know what insight meditation actually is. It's just being in the moment, noting things arise and pass away. Blimey, I can do that. I can do that. So, Liz, I found that the noting accurately keeps the mind quite focused anyway. Yes, I mean it is a form of concentration. You are focused. There is one direction. That's what one pointedness means. It's like, oh no, we're just doing one thing here. You know, I'm not going to do 10 things. I'm not going to multitask for the period of this meditation. I'm not going to write shopping lists and imagine being the drummer in ZZ Top, or where did that come from? Don't know. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to do any. I'm just going to do one thing, which is note whatever arises in my experience. That's your purpose. That's your one pointedness. That's your one direction. And if you've got that, nothing else matters. So, yeah. So there's no reason why, if you've got that focus, you've got that direction, that your mind will get away from underneath you. But even if it does, is that a problem? Because contrast, that process of losing mindfulness will reinforce the value of mindfulness to the mind, and it will help you redouble your efforts. Peter. Oh, I love the Dhamma. Oh, I really do. It's just the best thing in the world. See, here I go again. But it is. Reflecting on Dhamma, reflecting on it, the absolute brilliance of it, brings joy to the mind. Peter, on the subject of neutral feelings, sometimes it seems to me that feelings are black and white. Oh, pleasant or unpleasant, in the sense that if a feeling isn't unpleasant, then it must be pleasant, albeit relatively. So pleasant feelings go from just not being unpleasant right up until amazing, but obviously I'm mistaken. But I find it hard to get my head around only noting neutral feeling by a process of elimination. Oh, well, I mean, really? Is, with the greatest respect, Peter, you know, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but you're going to allow that to get in your way? I mean, just note. I mean, the objective of noting feeling is to see that feeling is transient. It's not to, you know, get into this intellectual process of finding ever more refined gradations of feeling. That's not the point. And maybe I've misunderstood your remarks, but it's like, I mean, it's making it more complex than it needs to be. It's doubt again. It's trying to be sure, trying to be safe, trying to be certain. Whereas the middle way, there is actually so much more lateral freedom. It's like being able to distinguish three kinds of feelings helps in so many ways, because it establishes the kind of response that arises. If the feeling is pleasant, even if it's a relatively sort of slight feeling, fine. Note it as a relatively slight feeling of pleasantness. But neutral feeling does exist, and we ignore them. So having the three kinds of feelings means you're able to determine the kind of response that arises to a painful feeling, the kind of response that arises to a pleasant feeling, and the kind of response that arises to a neutral feeling. I'm not sure I can help you any more with that, because I think it's just, again, I just think it's overthinking. Peter, the other Peter, I've seen the suffering and no experience will resolve it, but it just seems like I've noted annoying phenomena for ages. I get some equanimity but can't keep the balance to stay there. Things can sometimes get really clear and speed up really fast. Okay, comments getting a bit long here. Just to say, I prefer shorter comments because otherwise it gets difficult to keep up with it all. I can't keep the balance to stay there. Things can sometimes get really clear and speed up really fast. It's like things break into discrete chunks that vanish immediately, but I get excited and get knocked out of it, then annoyed. Yeah, there's in the Buddhist teaching he talks about allaying the passionate response. So on the one hand elation, and on the other hand depression. And it's because we're attached to the actual process itself. We're driven by the need, the want to get somewhere. And so it's just learning through experience that the elation always leads to the depression. The elation excites the mind, the depression deflates the mind, and what really becomes annoying is falling for that again and again. And so the mind reaches equanimity concerning the meditation, concerning the unfolding of insight itself. Essentially, you'll just get bored of elation and depression. You'll see that it just gets in the way, and you'll just mature beyond it, really. We all have to accept that there are some days when insights are more easily, or at least noting is easier, it comes more easily, and there are days where it's more difficult. But that's the same with everything. Any sport, any hobby, anything. It's like the problem is looking for consistency. It's like, no, we're human, we're inconsistent, and it's just relaxing into that and not expecting too much too soon. Sounds to me like it's going fine. Sounds to me like it's going fine, Peter. Yeah, better days, worse days. But in terms of elation and depression, recognize that you're just tripping yourself up. And so the key is in including the tendency towards elation and depression in terms of the meditation. Include those responses. Recognize those responses. Reflect on them. Note them in your journal. That there's this tendency for the meditation to get wrecked by this attachment to results. And you'll find that you'll just move beyond it. You'll just mature beyond it. Okay. Look, guys, we're in extra time, and I really don't want this to go to penalties. Not tonight. Another night we can do penalties, but we're not doing penalties tonight. Come on. Painful feelings. Julian, 15 minutes later than we are now. All right, well, I'll read a comment and then I have to hurry because everyone's saying goodbye and I'm losing the comment. Hang on. I've noticed how I can subtly grasp my in alignment state and think it's a solid thing and thereby lose suddenly. Well, there you go. There you go. So the moment you attach to it, it's gone. You just have to let it be. It's being rather than doing. Oh, you're all saying goodbye. All right, we're gone. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Jim. All right, lovely to see all your names. And yeah, so next week we're we'll be back, of course, be back doing live streams, and fingers crossed, we will be able to start meeting on a Wednesday again. But we'll have to. We will have to wait and see, won't we? But we'll be back soon, I'm sure we will. Thank you, everyone. I'm glad if anything in that was helpful to you. So we'll be back the Monday after next. So until then, have a great couple of weeks.